welcome back to Groups, everyone. Thanks for letting me join your group once again for another week. And it's November. I'm finding that very hard to believe. I feel like this fall is just flying by. But how has your week been? I had a blast this past Sunday at the trunk or treat that we put on at the church. Leslie and I made a basketball carnival game for our trunk, and honestly the kids loved it. I think this might become something that I look forward to every year. It was such an awesome way to spend Halloween, and it was amazing to see so many people from the community. One thing that I really loved was that a couple of our Dive Deeper groups, our small groups for youth, came out and they had a trunk in the event together. And here is why I think this is really cool. I have two things. First, this was a chance for them to bond as a group. Coming together weekly for a meal or tea and coffee and then a discussion is great, and I hope that you're finding that you are forming meaningful relationships within your group members, but diverse shared experience creates intimacy. Because these Dive Deeper groups served at Trunk or Treat together, they've now experienced something together. This helps them grow as a group. Another way to think about this is to think about maybe a group of people who go on a mission trip together. When this group comes back, they come back bonded. They have cohesion, hopefully, and have formed deep relationships with each other. And why? Because they've shared experiences. So here's the second reason. They were active in serving together. Serving is one of the 4 environments that we as a church think you should be working towards doing to help you grow closer to Jesus. When we serve other people, we're actively doing what Jesus did, and we grow closer to Jesus, to other people, and we help them experience the love of Christ. And I would love to see your group develop a habit of serving together like these Dive Deeper groups did. Just like everything with the Christian walk, these groups exist for a higher purpose than our own personal growth. That's part of it for sure, don't get me wrong, but our groups should exist to be and make disciples of Jesus, just like our church does. It's easy for our groups to exist simply to be disciples and never accomplish the mission of making disciples, of loving and serving others. So at some point, I might give you a question to discuss some possible ways that you could do this. But for now, I just wanted to put that in your mind so that you could start brainstorming. Maybe you could pray together as a group and ask God to lead you to a place where He would like you to serve together after this video. But anyway, let's dive into our topic of discussion for tonight. We've been traveling through a series called Who is This God?, where we're covering the basics of the Christian faith by looking at God and His attributes and discovering more about Him. We've looked so far at His holiness, His nearness, and then last week we covered the Trinity. This week we're going to dive into His patience. I have to say, I am thankful for this attribute of God. And as a way to get our conversation going, I thought I would ask you this question. When have you had to wait for something? I would love for you to tell your group about it. Maybe this was a simple thing, like waiting in line at the grocery store, or maybe it was waiting to see your child or best friend or family through COVID. But what has been a time that you have had to wait and exercise patience? The one that comes to my mind for me is actually right around this time of year as we begin to approach Christmas. When I was a kid, I remember that this was such a tough time of patience. I would start to think about Christmas and what I might get for a present, and then I would have to wait and wait and wait. But this sense of waiting still comes for me this time of year. It seems like such a time of patience as I wait for the school semester to be over, and when I get to relax and celebrate with family. But what about you? When have you had to wait for something? Okay, well, welcome back from discussion. What did you learn about your group members? Are you all a patient bunch, or do you struggle to wait for some things? Well, on Sunday, Pastor Danny talked to us about God's patience. I think you all likely have a very good idea of what it means to be patient. This is not one of those concepts that are super difficult to grasp. God is patient, but first, let me define patience for you. I grabbed this from Google, so don't worry, you can trust it. Patience is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting upset. Here's the thing. There's this idea of God out there that He is quick-tempered and a tyrant who is ready to pounce and punish us when we mess up and sin. Some people think of our God as angry and mean, But our God is patient. Now, not to say that God doesn't judge. We're going to dive into that next week. But for now, I want you to realize that God is patient. Pastor Danny also used the term slow to anger to help us understand God's patience. He isn't quick to get angry or upset. He is slow to anger. He is patient. And in fact, as Danny mentioned on Sunday, our God takes delight in showing mercy. Let me read to you from Micah. Who is a God like you, who pardons sins and forgives the transgressions of the remnant of his inheritance? You do not stay away forever, but delight to show mercy. So if you remember back to the sermon, Danny shared with us 3 things about God's patience. We're going to tackle 2 of them here, and then I'm going to save the last for our next discussion break. The first point about God's patience was that it is long and generous. God's patience lasts a very long time. Think about the narrative of the Bible. Think about the Israelites. How many stinking times do we see the narrative of God giving them instructions, then the Israelites messing it up, and then God coming back and showing them grace and mercy? Again and again this happens. I know for certain that God is far more patient than I ever could be. His patience is long and generous. Here's the second thing about God's patience. God's patience is purposeful. Pastor Danny said that God is patient with us because he doesn't want us to miss out on everything that he has for us. God is compassionate, loving, merciful, and full of grace. And we experience these things as God is patient with us. As God is patient with us, he has the chance to have the kind of a relationship with us that he desires, one that is close, intimate, and forever. Without his patience, none of this would be possible. If you think back to the sermon on Sunday, you might remember the first reflection question at the end of the service was this: when have you experienced God's patience? I want you to now think a little bit deeper on this and try and think about this. Think about the times you have experienced God's patience and then answer this question: what would happen if God's patience was not long and generous or not purposeful? So what do you think? What would happen if God's patience were not long and suffering or purposeful? Okay, moving on. Are you thankful that God's patience is both long and generous and purposeful? The final aspect of patience that Pastor Danny unpacked for us on Sunday was that God's patience is not forever. This one is a little more unsettling than the first 2. There's some uncertainty around what this means and what its implications could be when we first hear this. But I want to remind you of something else that Pastor Danny shared before we move any further here. He said this: God's first inclination towards you is love and mercy, not judgment and wrath. But there's also this truth that God's patience is not forever. In our key text from Sunday, Danny highlighted the place where it says that God does not leave the guilty unpunished. So there will be a time when God is no longer patient with us and will punish those who are guilty. So his patience is not forever. Danny explained the danger associated with this by talking about the misconception that because God is patient, you can just go along living your life as if he doesn't exist and then one day turn to him and receive salvation. It sounds kind of good, doesn't it? But what if you don't always want that? What if you someday hate God and want nothing to do with him? So today I want to challenge you and ask you that same question from the service. Are you taking advantage of God's patience? Are you assuming or presuming that God will be patient with you forever? Maybe this is a reluctance to become a follower of Jesus. Or maybe you are following Jesus, but you're doing it half-heartedly. You show up to church, but don't really take it seriously. You're not reading your Bible. You're not praying. Are you using God's patience as an excuse to be lazy? I would love you to discuss that with your group now. Maybe share what you were thinking about during the reflection question in the service, or share new thoughts. And remember, this is a place of confidence, trust, and not a place of judgment or condemnation. When we share things in our groups, it's for the purpose of growing and being better followers of Jesus. It says in James to confess your sins to one another so that you may be healed. I would encourage you to do this now. Be honest, be real. Are you taking advantage of God's patience? All right, well, I hope you had a good discussion there. I know that question was a little deep and vulnerable, but I want to encourage you. Vulnerability is where we get at the stuff that God is doing deep inside of us. God doesn't want to just affect the surface level. He wants to change you from the inside out. If you shared something personal, I want to thank you and tell you that I'm proud of you. And if not, that's okay too. We never want you to feel forced to share during groups. But I would encourage you to think about the question on your own, even if you didn't share with your group. Maybe you could find one member of your group who you could feel confident and comfortable sharing with if you aren't comfortable to share with the whole group. But as we end this video today, remember that God is patient with you. But now it's your turn. What stood out to you this week from the sermon? Did God reveal anything to you personally? Did you disagree with anything that was shared? What about from your time spent in the home environment as you personally spent time with Jesus this week? How has God been shaping you? Discuss these things with your group now, and as always, keep the conversation going.